Hi folks, this is Mary Claire Erdenast. Welcome to Play4Keeps podcast. We are recording new plays as podcasts in Ashland, Oregon as a part of the Ashland New Plays Festival. Today we are listening to a conversation between Leslie Slape and Jeannine Grizzard. Leslie Slape is an award-winning news reporter, and her first solo play, The Harder Courage, is included in Play4Keeps Premium Collection. This historical drama was a finalist at the Ashland New Plays Festival in 2018 and was selected for a developmental workshop at Theater 33 in Salem, Oregon, with performances August 7th through the 11th, 2019. Jeannine Grizzard is a playwright, actor, instructor, and since 2010 is the producing artistic director of Ashland Contemporary Theater. Her one-woman play, Pankhurst, Freedom or Death, which she wrote and performs in, is a part of the Play4Keeps Premium Collection. Before we get started, I want to remind everyone to join us in Ashland, Oregon, October 16th through the 20th, for readings of Starter Pistol by Michael Gotch, Pelicans by David Johnston, The Night Climber by Joshua Rebel, and an honorable mention of the 2019 Kilroy's List, The Way North by Tira Palmquist. As a reminder to all playwrights, Ashland New Plays Festival is now accepting play submissions for the 2020 Fall Festival. Go to ashlandnewplays.org to find out more. Please enjoy listening to Leslie Slape and Jeannine Grizzard.
Hey, Jeannine.
Good morning, Leslie. How are you?
Oh, I'm just great. And you?
Very good. Very good. Just sitting here with my cup of tea and ready to talk history plays with you.
Yes. Yes. How fun to find somebody else who writes a historical play. And so different.
Yes. Yes, it's very different. What was your purpose in writing this particular story? I had a teaching purpose in writing the story of the lead suffragette in the battle for our right to vote 100 years ago. But tell me what your mission was in diving into history.
Well, part of it was just simple curiosity. When I ran across the story as part of my job as a police reporter, I thought, wow, this is fascinating. You know, I wonder what goes on when you have a sheriff who's really the only full-time employee guarding a guy for 8 months, and then he has to kill him. And so it was mostly curious. But then as I started to dig into it, I found that the story's not out there. There's little bits, you know, there's like around Kalama, there's rumors like, oh yeah, we heard there was a hanging here, you know, things like that. But it's not in the books. And I just felt like, okay, I've got to, you know how they say, you write the book you want to read, you write, you know, make the play you want to see. Exactly. I wanted to make, get the history out there because it is interesting. And I would read it if it was written. So it wasn't written, so I wrote it.
Excellent. That's wonderful. Well, I wrote my play because I attended a workshop in Jean Houston's modality called social artistry in 2012. And Jean posed the question to everybody, what can you do to help humanity? And we had to come up with a little project that we could do to help humanity. And I thought, well, I can write a play to teach women about the battle for our freedom 100 years ago, since we seem to be still fighting that battle.
Oh, I know. ERA, will it ever? And
yeah,
it's a wonderful educational play that you've written because, I mean, I know a lot about feminism. It's important to me, but I didn't know as much about the British struggle as I did about the American one. And to hear the voice of Emmeline talking about the force feeding and the reasons that they did the window breaking and stuff and trying to get people's attention and the feedback, the pushback that they were getting. And it's like, my gosh, we can't win, but I'm not going to give up. It's inspiring.
Well, thank you. They were enormously inspiring. I'd like to say a little bit about what my play is about, because I discovered in writing this that Emmeline Pankhurst is not a household word in America. And I would say that of all single individual people in the history of the women's movement, she is the leader most responsible for putting the cause over the edge and the British getting the right to vote in 1918, right after the war. So suffragette leader Emmeline Pankhurst is recuperating from her hunger strike illness from prison in Paris before sailing to the U.S. to deliver her very famous speech, Freedom or Death, on tour, particularly around New England. And her host in Connecticut was Katharine Hepburn's mother, who was a famous American suffragette, also named Katharine Hepburn. And so Emmeline conjures up a friendly American audience in her imagination to try out bits of the speech on, and to tell the story about how the suffragettes have reached their current stalemate crisis. So it's 1913, and things are in a very bad conflict. And a play, if it's going to be a real play and not a history lesson, has to have a theme. Mm-hmm. So the theme is the great leader, Emmeline, trying to figure out why that strategy is not working, because it wasn't working. At that point, things were getting worse and not better. So what's the X factor about what the opposition is doing and why the opposition is getting so entrenched that's being missed in their calculation? So if I had to put my finger on a single sentence that would be the theme of the show, it would be that great leaders question their actions and have the wisdom to reassess them.
Mm-hmm.
What was your theme? Was it about the transformation of the two men somehow through their friendship?
Yeah, there's a line in the story that Susan, Ben talks about his wife telling him this story about these two enemies, and you can't hate someone when you know their story. You aren't enemies when you know them, and that's kind of through there, because when Robert is arrested, he is reviled by the public. They call him a demon. They call him a devil, and they want to lynch him. And Ben isn't there to save. I mean, he's there to save his life because lynching is a crime. He's there to save the people from lynching him as much as he's there to save Robert from being lynched. But he comes to really like him, and still he goes through with his duty, because he doesn't have a choice. That's why it's a tragedy. But he doesn't feel any kind of, how do I say, he says, no rancor, and he sees that he's not going to just go out there and torture this guy, and like some hangings are. He's going to give him a death with dignity despite the situation. So that's about the only friendly thing he can make the hanging painless.
Your plot's pretty short and straightforward. Could you just recap it for folks?
Yeah, sorry. I keep forgetting that not everybody knows it, because I think about it all the time. So there is a man, Robert Day, who was arrested for murder. Ben Holmes arrests him. He's the sheriff. And then he guards him through 8 months of the trial, the conviction, the appeal, the and all the things that go with that process through the criminal justice system, until ultimately Ben must hang Robert for murder, and then he buries him. And we feel the world around them, their wives, their children, the public, but we don't see them. And so through the process, they become friends. And both of them have secrets. Both of them have history in war. And they find that they can understand each other, even though they're quite different people. And they help each other.
Yeah. Yeah, they do. They learn about themselves by learning about each other.
Yes.
I think it's a good juncture for me to ask you the question that stuck out for me in listening to your play. So about 20 minutes, 25 minutes before the end of the play, about an hour and 15 minutes into it, Day is in his prison cell. We've just had Ben's thoughts, Ben's self-reflections on the situation that the appeal didn't work and a date's been set for the hanging. And the narrator says that Day has acquired an inner peace, even a joy at the life he's leaving behind. And that really stuck out for me, because that would not be every prisoner's experience of long imprisonment, particularly in a cell as dark as that one, with so little diversity of human companionship, just the sheriff visiting whenever he can. And it seems to me that change in Day of accepting his death and going to it cheerfully. They're talking about how he's going to tell jokes on the gallows, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think he's partly doing that to help his friend, who he knows it's really hard for the sheriff to hang him. That really turns the whole play. Would you say? Would you agree with that?
It is. It was quite the transformation, and I found references to that in my research, that he had become at peace. And part of it was the gallows conversion. He decided he was going to, once he realized he didn't have any way out, then he was going to do everything he could to make sure that he could see his wife in heaven. I mean,
mm-hmm.
so he developed this no fear and more acceptance. But beyond that, I saw that he saw he is actually looking outside of himself and seeing how much Ben was suffering. I think early on, Robert's pretty much all about Robert. He's the one who's scared and he's fighting and he's angry but later, as he's coming to accept his fate, he's also looking out for his friend.
Yeah. So that's a profound psychological journey. One of the potential questions that we were asked in preparing for this talk was, what is something about yourself that future historians will not get from your your immediate biography or from just hearing or reading the play? And there's something in my background that I don't list in my biography very much. And that is, I did a 3-year training program as a pastoral counselor.
Ah, yeah, I wouldn't have known that.
So I studied, I had about 10 years of making a real, I was not involved in theater at all. And I made a real project of how the mind works. Part of those 10 years were me getting a master's in philosophy, and I became a teacher briefly, university instructor briefly. And I talk about that, but I don't talk about the pastoral counseling spiritual part, which is really looking at what egoic strategies are and the tales we tell ourselves and the terrors that drive us. And all of that introspection is very useful for getting behind that, to see what's the essence that's driving a character. And when you take away all those egoic structures, what's left? Is there anything left? And it seemed to me when I heard that line that in your play that Robert had a connection with what's left.
Yeah.
When all of his strategies were gone and all of his fears were gone, because the death became a certainty. So you can't fear a certainty. And I just love to hear more about that within your play.
Wow,
I
thanks
think
for
that's
articulating.
really fascinating, because that turns everything to get us to the type of ending with these two men that we have, is his transformation in the cell and what he's seeing about himself that he can then get behind, that he can literally get in the back of, to see from the backside of what he's been doing and how he's been living, because that's the only thing that's going to bring you that kind of peace and joy.
I love you're saying that, because I never thought it out like that. I just felt it.
Mm-hmm.
I spent a long time living with these guys in my head, and actually his coming to terms with it has been part of the earliest portion of the play I was working on,
Mm-hmm.
and the part that I've lived along with working out. Well, you spelling it out like that, it's that's where I'm going with it. I felt I used to write obituaries. Maybe that's something that's something I've never put here. I struggle a lot with how do I answer this question about what do you think about, what's about yourself that's people aren't going to learn. But the writing of the obituary column was a transformative experience. I spent many years taking these bits of people's information and reassembling the life as a gift to the family. I wrote them. They were news stories. These were not written by the family at this point in my newspaper's history. These were written by the reporters. And so I did everything I could to make it matter, make this person's life matter for the last time. I saw it as a gift to the family and a way to help the family through the process of grief. But I also felt in doing this so much of a resolve to make my life matter. I didn't want to come to the end of my days with people going, well, all I can say about her is that she liked to watch television or something, which is what somebody said once in an obit. And that made me so sad. So I feel as Robert is there reevaluating his life that it's like I just kind of re-entered that mood I always was in writing an obit. And you go into reflection big time, and you see what really mattered. And so I'm just putting him, I'm sitting there letting him go inside me and talk through me, and figured, well, that's probably what I would do. And I always have to have it come from in instead of from without, because I'm not the observer at that moment. I am him. And that brings stuff out of Ben. Ben's pretty reserved. Everything I've read about him, he was bashful. Super shy. He was, and super kind. But he also was really a publicity shy. I don't find much about him in the newspapers. I don't find his words. I really wanted hard to find even one sentence by him so I could hear his voice. So I had to live with Ben too. I'm a little more like Ben, though. A lot more like Ben. I'm quiet, introspective, shy.
Do you have brothers? Do you have male siblings, or did you get married kind of young? Because you have a good male voice.
Oh, I got that. I got the help on that from two men that I know. I did not marry young, and I have one brother who is really shy himself, but we're close. We're like a year apart, 1 week less than a year apart. So when I began writing this play, I asked two actors whom I trust and have known a long time if they would help me develop these characters, because I wanted them to be authentically male, and they've been fully embraced in the process.
That's great. Are the ones that I saw a picture online of two men at music stands in Longview?
That was the men, yes.
And is that who we hear in the Play4Keeps?
No, the Play4Keeps actors are from the Oregon Shakespeare Festival.
Uh-huh.
And I wasn't present for anything, no rehearsals. That was a good test of my play to find out if my words were going to actually be read as I heard them in my head by people who were nowhere near me. And I loved what they did. I loved listening to them read my words as I heard them, and the quality. Oh gosh, I was blown away by it.
They did a very, very good job. I was quite impressed.
Oh, me too. And I listen to everything on Play4Keeps. I'm right away, as soon as something new is up, I listen to it as soon as I have the time to open up for it. And they're all so different.
Yeah.
Your play really works well on the Play4Keeps format because she's talking to her imagination in most of it. And so it really it's very close to radio, you might say. I mean, I think of Play4Keeps is kind of just a little bit like radio.
When I do it,
others.
Obviously, I wrote it to perform myself, and I think there's one other on the Play4Keeps website that's a one-woman show that the gal wrote it to perform herself.
Yeah, that's one of the first ones, the artichoke.
The artichoke play.
Yes.
But I've mounted it. I had a full production last April, which is how Jim Pagliasotti came and saw it to know that he wanted to put it on, which was absolutely wonderful. And but so I don't have a fourth wall at all. I literally walk down into the audience and tell things to very specific people because I've conjured up, Emmeline has conjured up a full audience like she will have in New England to tell her story to. So you had to make up a lot of stuff. I didn't. I only had to make up a psychological turning point, or I should say infer a particular issue around which to build a psychological turning point so that, we have an inner conflict and we build to a climax and there's a decision that's made and there's a resolution, right? So there's our structure. Mm-hmm. You had to do a lot more inferring, I think, than I did.
Yeah, reading between the lines of what I could find and, taking the facts and assembling the story around those, in many cases, a very thin little skeleton. It was a challenge, but a fun one, but it took a long time. One of the biggest challenges I had was in the research. Because, as I said earlier, the story's not in the history books. And if there were letters and diaries, they were not preserved. And even the court records weren't preserved, except for the Supreme Court decision to deny the appeal. So from that, I have some essence of, I can read the information, the charges. I can read those. Mm-hmm. I found the judge's words where he's, telling Robert, he's going to be hanged. Those are from the newspaper. And I found, it took me a while to find more than just the Kalama Bulletin, which I can get in our local library. I was looking for other newspaper stories, and most of these newspapers were not preserved. But I got a hold of the state librarian, and she sent me Robert Day's autobiography that had appeared in the newspaper, and that just opened things wide.
Oh, wow. Yeah. It helps to have an autobiography. I had one. Emmeline Pankhurst has her autobiography called My Own Story, which you can read in PDF form online at any time. So I had plenty of her talking about her own life. So you found an autobiography letter to the editor?
In my play he's written it out and given it to the reporter. He may have just given it orally. Either way, a reporter just wrote, put it all down just in his own words. And And so I got a lot of information from that, and it sent me off. I've had to also track through errors. So I'll do searches for Robert Day and searches for Robert T. Day and Robert Thompson Day, and I found Robert S. Day and Robert L. Day, and it's still the same Robert Day, Bob Day, and then the names of the sheriff, the name of the victim. And it's been hard, but
so that's your challenge. The wonderful question we were offered is, what are your challenges in telling the story?
That was the first one.
Finding the real story is
finding the real story. And we were questioning, what about Ben Holmes's military service? And when I found he had been a deserter, that was a huge shock. And then I had to figure out, why did he, and figure that story out, because I didn't have it. I only had the details in the register. The other challenge was giving myself permission to not be the reporter. Because I'm a newspaper reporter, and I had to turn into a playwright, and I had to not make historical accuracy be the driving factor. It had to be there, but the driving factor was the story in my imagination. And it's not going to be a documentary. It's going to be a story, a human story. And so it's a constant struggle, because whenever I find a new detail, I'm like, oh, this is a wonderful detail, and how can I get it in the play? And then I have to tell myself, is this important to the play?
Yeah. Is it important to their psychological journey? That's right.
Exactly.
That's right. So in my case, one of the biggest challenges was the structure. I didn't lack for autobiography. I have Emmeline's speeches. You can also read those online. Mm-hmm. Her daughter Sylvia wrote a biography of her mother in the context of the story of the whole suffragette movement. So obviously I selected topics to go through, which is, you can't tell this story without talking about the force feeding.
Yeah.
So that's going to be the biggest, most intense, most emotional of the episodes to cover in this story. So the first thing you do is you figure out where to stick it, and it goes right dead in the middle of the second act. That's where it has to go.
And it brought me to tears. I tell you, it's so emotional.
If it's the biggest thing. So I did an outline of all the topics, and then I wrote it really quite quickly. I put myself down in my chair for 5 hours a day for 16 days and wrote it straight through. But episodes that had already been written had to be picked up and reordered in the play to be effective in terms of their structure for the dramatic build of her psychology, of her personal story, because it can't be a history lesson. It has to be about what she's considering in a personal battle to get to a new result, which is a different tactic and strategy. And so to some extent, I made that up. The existing historical information about what she was doing when and what the tactic was as soon as she got back from America. First of all, she was arrested in, I think it was Liverpool Harbor. It was one of those West Coast harbors of England where they literally brought out the gunship and cleared the harbor to arrest her off the steamer.
Oh my gosh.
It was a big deal. And they arrested her, but then she got out. And then there was a whole new strategy. And that strategy was about not going to Parliament, but proclaiming that, since Parliament doesn't think we're real citizens and we don't really have rights because we're denied the right to petition to Parliament anymore, then we will throw ourselves on the mercy of the great man, which is the king. So the whole structure of her particular thrust changed from a legislative structure to an appeal to patriarchy on its own terms, in the sense of being the protector, right? Mm-hmm. So the king needs to protect us by giving us our civil rights. And it was really the only place she could go, because all the legislative part had been done over 5 years and was a total dead end because of the prime minister, who could veto anything. So, and he was dead set against it. His name was Herbert Henry Asquith. And
yes, she talks a lot about him, and oh my gosh.
Yeah. And his Trumpian womanizing, big time womanizing. So there was this change in the tactic, but in terms of her having a diary that she published at the time about, oh my goodness, our strategy isn't working, and what am I missing in my evaluation of the situation, and how have I failed? No, there's none of that. I had to come up with that because of the existing evidence of how it shifted, and also getting to know her as a person. And one of the reasons it shifted was in terms of the literal prison battles, the battle between the prison and the woman's body, because the women would go in and they would not eat and they would become ill, and the government did not want them to die in prison, so they would be discharged to get better. And in the early days, that was the end of their sentence. And in the later days, they were watched while they got better, so that when they got better, they could be brought back into prison and do it all over again to finish their sentence. And that was really horrible. And so a couple of the suffragettes, well, maybe more than a couple, but it was started by Emmeline's own daughter, Sylvia, who was also a suffragette leader in her own right, stopped drinking. And that is very much not widely known, that they went on thirst strikes. Now, a thirst strike is a very dangerous thing.
Oh, yeah. You can go without food far longer than you can go without water.
Very dangerous thing, what it does to the body when you have that much toxins festering inside. And so she's questioning, can we really keep doing this particular strategy at this level of cost to the women? Because they're not just being, clubbed in the head and dead on the field of battle, which would be the London street, carrying a sign outright. Or they're not like Emily Davis running in front of the king's horse. Killed outright. It's a long, slow, horrible, lingering death that you don't recover from. She herself, Emmeline, did this strategy herself, and she got liver damage that lasted the rest of her life. She was always a little yellow. Her body never recovered from blowingness. So she's questioning her tactics, and she's questioning the very nature of what the entrenched opposition is. Why do the men feel so insulted? Because that's what they felt. So she really takes a good look at that. And that's why you got to play instead of a history lesson.
Yeah, it's like they're thinking, okay, we're supposed to take care. We're supposed to do for the women. Obviously, they don't think we're doing enough. They don't think we're doing it right. And they are insulted, and they're wrong. But they couldn't see that. They couldn't see that it's very much like the American Revolution, where no taxation without representation, or they can't do anything. They can't petition because they're not voters. They can't. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was really moved in hearing your play and angered that people could treat each other like this.
Yes. Yes. And Emmeline comes to the conclusion that in this particular battle, this sex battle between men and women, we can't leave each other. We're part of a couple. We make children. We're not the invading British occupying Kenya, where we can get out and leave them to themselves. The men can't get away from us and leave us to ourselves.
And she knew how a good relationship worked because she had it with her own husband.
She did. She had excellent relationships with men, and men were willing to put their lives on the line for her. It wasn't just a women's battle. There were a number of men who really stepped up in a very big way, including the founder of the Labour Party, the British Labour movement, a Scot named Keir Hardie. So, what is next for you? Are you doing something after this play? Are you working on a new project?
I'm always got something working. But what is coming up next and in August is that I'm going to be workshopping the Harder Courage, which is one of the things I had hoped to have happen when I entered it in the Ashland New Plays Festival, and it made it to the finals, but not in the 4 who got workshopped. And I had an opportunity to bring it up again. It still hasn't been produced, so it was still available to be sent out to Theater 33 in Salem, Oregon. So this August 7th through the 11th, it'll be workshopped down there. And so I'll be doing some rewrites and stuff during the rehearsal process, and then we'll be talkbacks every night, and I'm very excited about that. I'm also working on a short story right now for a mystery. I'm hoping to get it into a mystery magazine, and I have another historical play I'm working on about a 19th century female journalist. Not Nellie Bly, but in the same era. But I'm making her up. And I've got a short play I just wrote. I'd like to do some silly stuff once in a while, and this was just a more like a sketch comedy, I guess. But it's a comic play about a woman who receives an unexpected delivery of a hippopotamus.
Well, I wish I could put on your work. You're out of our geographical area for my local Playwrights Festival, which is basically Roseburg to Reading. If you can drive to see your show and come to a few rehearsals, we'll put on your play. We kind of consider it. That's our geography here here in Ashland. But our short play festival that we've done. Well, we've really done it for about 13 years, but under the name Moonlighting, this will be our 10th year. And so it's usually between 5 and 7 short plays. And I've written a new piece that's contemporary, informed by the fact that I did the Pankhurst one, where a very upset woman who is pregnant talks about the nature of rights and how we don't know what that is anymore. And that's how all these anti-choice, anti-abortion laws are able to come to the fore in the country, because we've forgotten what the meaning of rights are, when rights are about things instead of your metaphysical state of being, they're about things that can be done to your body. So, for example, like healthcare being a right, or squatters' rights to a piece of property, or animal rights, animals that don't have free will in the sense that we understand it, having rights. So she draws the distinction between the rights that the countries founded on in the English Civil War occurred on, which are like metaphysical rights to your integrity, for the king not to own you, essentially, right? Mm-hmm. Versus good policy good political policies that get called rights. So she stands up and talks about that and how this is going to radically affect her life and her future as a lawyer, which she wants to be. She's in school to be a lawyer.
Oh, so that sounds really interesting.
That was my new project. It's a 12-minute monologue, which it turns out I'm probably delivering.
Yeah. Do you usually write for yourself? I mean, I know that you specialize in one-woman shows, so I guess that's a no-brainer. But if you write something that's more in one character, are you also thinking of performing it yourself?
This is the only short monologue I've ever done. And I did write it for another actress who I thought would be wonderful at it. Unfortunately, she's not going to be able to do it. So as I've been doing it for other people to work on the writing, the feedback has been, you need to get up and do this yourself. You need to sell this piece yourself. So now I'm doing it. I always wrote the Pankhurst for me to do specifically. My intention was to tour this year and next year, right before it went up in 2018, April of 2018. The British had their 100-year anniversary of the first women's right to vote, and that was the women over 30 with some level of property or other educational qualifications. And then 1919, a few days ago, in fact, was when the 19th Amendment was passed and women could have Congress passed it, but then it had to get ratified by the states, and that was in 20. So in these years, it was my plan to tour it, but I'm not able to leave home and tour it. I'm just not physically able to do it. It's a big deal to get a full set waiting for you in every venue you go to and run my company. I run Ashland Contemporary Theater at the same time. So the wonderful Play4Keeps podcast is the great way for me to tour it without touring it. So I'm really thrilled that the show can go around the world without my body going with it.
It is a wonderful service. I mean, the plays on there, I can see them in my head, and I'm so excited to be able to see so much theater in my head. Where I live, it's a bit of a distance to theater. I can go to Portland. It's about an hour, but mostly the theater I see is the theater that I help put on in my local community theater.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I saw that. You're very involved with that.
I am very involved with it, yes. And we try to do as best, as we can. We've got our own high standards to hold up to, but there's only so much you can do when you're in a small town. And one of those things we don't do enough of is bring in new works. There's always a little bit of nervousness of, well, no one's heard of it. Are they going to even come? Yeah. And I'm there I really feel like I want to be the advocate for new works and new playwrights. So I'll try to wedge that in there somehow.
That's great. That's wonderful. You've got your community theater in such a forward-thinking mode.
I'm doing my best. We're all pretty passionate about it, though. So it'll happen. It just we just have to be open to it.
Yeah. So in answer to your question, my other plays, only of which there are a few little short plays that have been produced in our reading series over the years, those are not for me to perform. Those have other characters. There are 3 or 4 of them. And I have another full one act that was put on in my drama school in my early 20s. But other than that, I haven't been focusing on being a writer primarily. I've mainly been a producer for the last 10 years. And before that, I had that hiatus as a philosophy student and then a philosophy instructor. And before that, in the 90s, I was a professional theater producer in the Southeast, and I toured Shakespeare plays and original children's musicals and American classics through 5 states.
Oh, wow.
That was exhausting.
I imagine so.
It was exhausting. It's good to stay in one place and work in my garden. So it's been a delight talking to you, and I hope to see you again. I'm going to be driving up to Seattle this summer, and I'll contact you.
Oh, awesome.
I would love to meet on the way.
Yes, that would be great to meet on the way. Like I said, I'm about an hour north of Portland.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed listening to Leslie Slape and Jeannine Grizzard. Be sure to subscribe and tune in next week. Play for Keeps podcast is produced by Ashland New Plays Festival and Play for Keeps. This podcast was produced by Andy Herndon, art direction by Cara Quinn Lewis. Play for Keeps is directed by Jim Pagliasotti. Written content is edited by Carol Florian. Special thanks to Kyle Hayden, Jackie Apodaca, and Beth Kander. This is your host, Mary Claire Erdenast. Please visit us online at play4keeps.org. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. Help us spread the word. Follow, like, share, and retweet. See you next time at Play for Keeps podcast. Books are meant to be read. Plays are meant to be said.